response. Bob Seeley.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker. I'm going to speak to new clause 34 and may make some broader points as the honourable member did for Chipping Barnet, and I thank her for her great work and leadership on this issue. There are many good ideas that we've been discussing on all sides of the House today, and it's great to see such a brilliant minister in her role and dealing with this bill. Indeed, I think it's true to say there are quite a few ministers who have been dealing with this, but I'm glad that the buck has stopped with her, and I welcome all and any measures to support levelling up. The Isle of Wight is rich in so many ways, but economically is not necessarily one of them. We have a wonderful sense of community, a wonderful quality of life. But if I can achieve one thing in this place, it is to improve islanders' life chances and opportunities. And I'm delighted in the last 5 years the government has been listening more than it's done previously. So we've got 120 million additional investment. 48 million into the NHS. That build at St Mary's is due to start in the next 2 weeks. 26 million to rebuild Island Line, the railway line. In fact, I was on Ryde Railway Pier just a couple of weeks ago with my little hard hat, doing a sort of, Boris lookalike or whatever, because the rebuild of the railway pier is now happening as well. The levelling up agenda, the honourable gentleman for Sheffield South East, if I got it correctly, spoke about what's levelling up done. Actually, we've got a 240-tonne lift crane in East Cowes for our shipyard, which will drive dozens of new jobs and apprenticeship jobs in shipbuilding on the Isle of Wight, and the clippers that you see up and down the Thames are made on the island. So we've got lots of great things, and in training as well for Isle of Wight College. I get one of the many things that the former Prime Minister said, which really sticks with me, is talent is shared out equally in our nation, but opportunity isn't. And we feel that in a poorer part of a rich area. To come to compulsory purchase, if you go to any town or city in this country, apart from Brownfield, which we'll come to in a second, you see long-term, empty, derelict buildings. In coastal areas, as the Minister will know, and she's agreed, it's fantastic that she's agreed to come to the island, we look forward very much to hosting her. You go to coastal areas, and that problem is often especially acute, especially when you've had former hotels. So in a town like Sandown, a really lovely, wonderful community, we've got some of our most important and valuable sites standing empty for years. The Grand Hotel is owned by a developer who seems to be unwilling to develop his own properties. The Ocean Hotel, the technical ownership of it seems to change every month through flipping it through a series of highly questionable companies. One of the most important sites in Sandown, it's derelict, there's vandalism there. So we need these compulsory purchase powers. And actually, I respect property rights, but we need these compulsory purchase powers to be as strong as possible so communities like mine and the Isle of Wight Council can use it to do good. I'm also not entirely, I'm going to try this argument. I want to be able to get the Isle of Wight Council to compulsory purchase from the government. Camp Hill prison site, the third prison site on the island, it has been empty for 9 years. For 5 years, I have been asking for a decision on Camp Hill. The government can't decide if it wants to turn it back into a prison or wants to give us the land or sell the land privately, etc., etc. If the government can give us that land at a price that we can afford, we can do real good with it and we can build homes. Which brings me to the next point. The Right Honourable Member, honourable friend from Chipping Barnet, was making the point that actually we want to propose good stuff, which is why we proposed new clause 34 as one of nearly 20 amendments that we put down. There's this sort of incredibly trite conversation that's going around this issue, that if you object to top-down targets, if you object to this entirely depressing reliance on out-of-town, car-dependent housing estates plonked down in the middle of nowhere, somehow you're anti-young people, or you're a NIMBY, i.e. a local patriot in my opinion, what a NIMBY is, you're somehow hostile, you're shouting no, 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 like you've got your head in the ground like some ostrich. Actually, we're saying yes, yes, yes to so many ideas, which is why we're trying to give this government so many ideas, because we want planning and housing to be a success, because we want to protect communities, and at the same time, we recognise that we need to build. But we want a system that is community-centred, that is an environmentally friendly system, environment-centred, and we want it to be regen-centred. What on earth is the point when we have acre after acre of brownfield site in towns and cities up and down the country to be reliant on developers lazily building greenfield sites, alienating older people in the communities because they get their dog walking routes ruined and their view ruined. And yet so often, especially in the home counties, those houses can't actually be afforded by young people because all you're getting is people moving out of London. And that's a problem in Essex, in Kent and Hampshire. In the island it's slightly different dynamic because people retire to us. But either way, despite the fact that we've increased our population by 50% in 50 years, one of the most depressing facts is that we still export our young people too often. So new clause 34, giving us compulsory powers to act in the public good, is only one of a series of, I hope, good ideas that the Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet and I, and many people now on the top-down targets, new clause 21, I think we've got over 55 colleagues. Now, regardless what the Labour Party does, we need to be working together. We want to work together, and we want to be absolutely working with the government in the spirit of cooperation. But can the government please trust us on this issue and listen to us? Examples of other great ideas, apart from new clause 34, there's a new clause to have a use it or lose it rule to stop planners land banking. The fundamental problem that we have in this country, I would respectfully suggest, Mr Deputy Speaker, to the Minister, is not the fact that planners don't give out permissions. 80% of stuff gets passed. It's not the fact that pesky NIMBYs stop everything, because we know that's a load of rubbish. We know the fundamental problem is that developers have a vested interest in only releasing land for housing slowly, because it keeps the value of land high, it keeps the value of or the price of houses high, it keeps their share prices high, and it keeps the bosses' bonuses high. I'm sounding a bit like I should be on the other side of the house, but I'm a big fan of capitalism. But I want capitalism to work. I want the developer industry to serve the people of this country and not their bosses. And the way that we achieve that is getting a system that works. So we want a new clause for use it or lose it. We want a new clause that says, OK, you're going to have a time here where if you don't build out, you're paying council tax on that 200-house estate. And if you haven't built it, you're still paying council tax, come what may. We want bigger sticks. We want some nice carrots for brownfield, but we want bigger sticks for the developers. So when somebody gets a 1,000-acre site, they actually have to do something with it. They can't just sit on it and inflate their share price. We want what is in the public interest. And I know that, as soon as you're a minister, you think, I know best. I'm sure the minister doesn't. But, with some ministers, they know best. They want top-down stuff because that's where you drive reform. We know that a neighbourhood plan, a community that has a neighbourhood plan, is more likely to welcome development. Why? Because they get to shape it. Because all the so-called NIMBYs actually think, OK, here's a home for my kids. Here's a home for my daughter, my son-in-law. Here's a home for my grandkids. So they buy into it. That's why top-down targets fundamentally don't work, because they create an incredibly divisive battle between, on one hand, government saying you're going to build these many houses, ridiculous, absurd numbers for the Isle of Wight, considering our indigenous population is meant to decline by 9,000 in the next 15 years. It's absurd. So we get targets, and the local government then gets put under pressure, and then the developers start plonking greenfield permissions, because they can't be bothered to look at brownfield sites, which alienates communities. So it becomes fundamentally divisive, fundamentally adversarial. And do you know what I think, Mr Deputy Speaker, would absolutely revolutionise development in this country, so it becomes a win-win for communities? You change the economic incentives. You create more disincentives for greenfield sites, a super tax. So for every plot on a greenfield site, that has to pay for twice the amount on a brownfield site. Now, some brownfield sites are dirtier than others. But if you had a tax that said you knew if you were going to get 1,000 acres of greenfield site, okay, if you're giving up 1,000 acres of greenfield site in Cambridgeshire or Kent or Hampshire, if you knew you were getting 2,000 acres of brownfield site cleaned up, that is a win. That is something that we could accept. So we need to be thinking in much more creative terms. We need to be moving away from an adversarial system. That's why another of the amendments, along, Mr Deputy Speaker, with new clause 34, which we love, another amendment is for asking the government to look at the creation of incentives for brownfield and greater disincentives for greenfield. I mean, fundamentally, Mr Deputy Speaker, the government's going in the right direction on this, with the exception of one or two things, but it needs to go further. I'll give you another example. We're putting down a new clause about character test. Why should shoddy developers, some with criminal records, who intimidate people or don't take communities properly or never build out or build poorly, why can't that be a reason to object? Don't we want to clean up the development industry in this country, to have developers who are socially responsible, who do the right thing for their communities, who actually make an effort and can be rewarded because we support their development planning applications and we stop people who want to build caravan parks in the wrong place but use loopholes, which is another of our amendments. It's a great amendment. It would do real good. So why is the government not including it? So actually, whether people, Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barn, myself, and all these 55 colleagues who've signed that amendment on the top-down housing targets, and many others, I think we had about 30 colleagues who signed the amendment on the compulsory purchase. We want to say yes to stuff. We want our communities to feel that development works for them, works for the old folks in the communities, works for the young folks, works to regenerate, works to protect our environment, which is so important to our future, and which helps with this whole process of community-led regeneration. And it's in that spirit that we put down new clause 34, and it's in that spirit that all the other wonderful amendments that we put down, which we look forward to discussing with the government when it comes up with a second day, we look forward to discussing them then. But my plea is for the government to work with us on this, because we want to make this a win-win and not a lose-lose.